Welcome to the study. Let's look at this book, published in the 1760s by Robert Adam, about the palace of Diocletian, the Roman emperor, and the ruins that he sketched, his architectural drawings in Split in Croatia. There are a lot of beautiful architectural drawings, as well as some pictures or drawings of what Adam saw when he was touring the ruins, and lots of good descriptions of what he saw through the eye of an artist and architect. How would you like to draw the palace plan while I read to you and describe parts of it? You can use these colored pencils if you like, or just the grayscale, and have fun making a plan of Diocletian's imperial palace. I'll read while you sketch. The ancient Roman palace at Spalatro in Dalmatia, modern-day Split in Croatia, illustrated in the 1760s by Robert Adam, architect to King George III of England. First published in 1764. I beg leave to lay before your Majesty the ruins of Spalatro, once the favourite residence of a great emperor, who by his munificence and example revived the study of architecture, and excited the matters of that art to emulate in their works of elegance and purity of a better age. All the arts flourish under the princes who are endowed with genius, as well as possessed of power. Architecture in a particular manner depends upon the patronage of the great, as they are alone able to execute what the artist plans. Your Majesty's early application to the study of this art, the extensive knowledge you have acquired of its principles, encourages every lover of his profession to hope that he shall George III not only a powerful patron, but a skillful judge. At this happy period, when Great Britain enjoys the peace and reputation and power he has acquired by arms, your Majesty's singular attention to the arts of elegance promises an age of perfection that will complete the glories of your reign, and fix an era no less remarkable than that of Pericles, Augustus, or the Medicis. I am, may it please your Majesty, your Majesty's most dutiful servant and faithful subject, Robert Adam. The buildings of the ancients are in architecture what the works of nature are with respect to the other arts. They serve as models which we should imitate, and as standards by which we ought to judge. For this reason, they who aim at eminence, either in the knowledge or in practice of architecture, find it necessary to view with their own eyes the works of the ancients which remain, that they may catch from them those ideas of grandeur and beauty which nothing, perhaps, but such an observation can suggest. Scarce any monuments now remain of Grecian or of Roman magnificence but public buildings. Temples, amphitheatres, and baths are the only works which had grandeur and solidity enough to resist the injuries of time, and to defy the violence of barbarians. The private but splendid edifices in which the citizens of Athens and Rome resided have all perished. Few vestiges remain of those innumerable villas with which Italy was crowded, though in erecting and adorning them the Romans lavished the wealth and spoils of the world. Some accidental allusions in the ancient poets, some occasional descriptions in their historians, convey such ideas of the magnificence both of their houses in town and of their villas as astonish an artist of the present age. The more accurate accounts of these buildings, which we find in Vitruvius and Pliny, confirm this idea and convince us that the most admired efforts of modern architecture are far inferior to these superb works, either in grandeur or in elegance. There is not any misfortune which an architect is more apt to regret than the destruction of these buildings, nor could anything more sensibly gratify his curiosity or improve his taste than to have an opportunity of viewing the private edifices of the ancients, and of collecting from his own observation such ideas as concerning the disposition, the form, the ornaments, and uses of these several apartments, as no description can supply. This thought often occurred to me during my residence in Italy, nor could I help considering my knowledge of architecture as imperfect, unless I should be able to add the observation of a private edifice of the ancients to my study of their public works. This led me to form the scheme of visiting the ruins of Emperor Diocletian's palace at Spalatro in Dalmatia, that favorite building in which, after resigning the empire, he chose to reside. I knew from the accounts of former travelers that the remains of this palace, though tolerably entire, had never been observed with any accuracy or drawn with any taste. I was no stranger to the passion of that prince for architecture which prompted him to erect many grand and expensive structures at Rome, Nicomedia, Milan, Palmyra, and other places in his dominions. I had viewed his public baths at tallest as well as most entire of all the ancient buildings, with no less admiration than care. The palace of Diocletian at Spalatro possessed all those advantages of situation to which the ancients were most attentive, and which they reckoned essential to every agreeable villa. The soil of that part of Illyricum was dry and fertile, though now considerable tracts of land lie uncultivated. The air is pure and wholesome, and though extremely hot during the summer months, this country seldom feels sultry, and noxious winds, to which the coast of Istria and some parts of Italy are exposed. By the care of the architect in observing an excellent precept of Vitruvius, every inconvenience arising from the winds is avoided as far as possible, the principal streets or apertures of the villa being so disposed as not to lie open to the impression of any of the winds which blow most frequently in this climate. The views from the palace are no less beautiful than the soil and the climate were inviting. Towards the west lies the fertile shore that stretches along the Adriatic, in which a number of small islands are scattered in such a manner as to give this part of the sea the appearance of a great lake. On the northwest lies the bay which led towards the ancient city of Salona, and the country beyond it, appearing in sight, forms a proper contrast to that more extensive prospect of water which the Adriatic presents both to the south and to the east. Towards the north, the view is terminated by high and irregular mountains, situated at a proper distance, and in many places covered with villages, woods, and vineyards. From this description, as well as from the views which I have published, it is evident that no province in this wide extended empire could have afforded Diocletian a more elegant place of retirement, and the beauty of the situation, no less than the circumstance of its being in his native country, seems to have determined him to fix his residence there. The present state of this great structure may be more perfectly conceived by considering the plan of it than by any description whatsoever. The curiosity of the reader, however, will not be satisfied with viewing this building in its present ruinous condition, but must naturally desire to form some idea of what was its plan and disposition in its more perfect state. The present state of this great structure may be more perfectly conceived by considering the plan of it than by any description. The curiosity of the reader, however, will not be satisfied with viewing this building in its present ruinous condition, but must naturally desire to form some idea of what was its plan and disposition in its more perfect state. By good fortune, its remains are in many places so entire as to be able to fix with the utmost certainty the form and dimensions of the principal apartments. The knowledge of these leads to the discovery of the corresponding parts, and the description is given us by Pliny and Vitruvius of the Roman villas, enable us to assign to each apartment its proper name and to discover its use. The manners and domestic life of the ancients differed so widely from ours that their ideas with regard to what was necessary or ornamental in a dwelling house must likewise have been extremely different. The whole building was a quadrangular form, and was divided by two large streets, leading to the different gates and crossing each other at right angles. principal street, which we enter from the north, is 36 feet 3 inches in breadth. Its length from the inside of the gate to the place where it intersects the street, which runs from east to west, is 238 feet 512 inches. The breadth of the other street is the same, and it extends 424 feet 6 inches. Both are bounded on each side by arcades of 13 feet wide, many of which are still entire. The first of these streets leads directly to the Prestilium, which was the name the ancients gave the area or court before their villas. Then we ascend by a flight of steps into the porticus, which is of the Corinthian order. From this there were doors to 2 winding stairs, which led to the ground story, in order that the slaves might have access thither, without passing through any of the apartments. Yes, you can hear Mr. Dog on the floor, making some puppy dog noises. So he's joining us as you draw Diocletian's palace. From the porticus we enter the vestibulum, which was commonly of a circular form, and in this palace it seems to have been lighted from the roof. It was a sacred place consecrated to the gods. Next to the vestibulum is the atrium, a spacious apartment considered as essential to every great house. By the manner of distributing these apartments, the ancients seem to have had it in view to express, first of all, reverence for the gods and their ancestors, to whose virtues they were indebted for their grandeur. On each side of the door into the atrium lie 2 smaller rooms, one of which may have been the Cella Ostiari, or the porter's lodge, which Vitruvius tells us was common in houses of the Greeks, and placed on one side of that passage by them called Thyrorion. The other was probably what the ancients named Etabulinum, which Pliny mentions as a repository for the archives and records of the family, containing the history of illustrious actions of the ancestors. Cryptoporticus, like our modern galleries, was probably adorned with statues, pictures, and bas-reliefs, and in this palace serves likewise for giving access to several apartments without passing through. From the center of the cryptoporticus we look back to those parts of the palace which we have already passed through, and we observe a striking instance of that gradation from less to greater, of which some connoisseurs are to lend, and which they distinguish by the name of a climax in architecture. The vestibulum is larger and more lofty than the porticus. The atrium much exceeds the grandeur of the vestibulum, and the cryptoporticus may well be the last step in such a climax, since it extended no less than 517 feet. Next to the alae of the atrium are 2 passages, which by the Romans were called andrones, and the Greeks masaulae, from the situation between the halls. There is access from them to several great rooms. They were lighted from the roof and seem to have been contrived in order to prevent the noise of the ancients or the slaves in waiting in the atrium from reaching the adjacent apartments, and for that reason these apartments have not their entry immediately from the atrium. The first of these grand rooms is the basilica, which Vitruvius mentions as common in all great houses, and directs that it should be spacious and magnificent in proportion to the dignity of the proprietor. Diocletian's architect has been careful to observe this precept. The basilica here being such as suited the magnificence of an emperor. Adjoining this is the Corinthian Hall, which, with regard to the architect, has observed a rule of Vitruvius by making the length of the room twice its breadth. Corresponding to the Corinthian Hall and opposite to it is the Caesarine Hall, which in every particular resembles the former. These halls together, with the tetrastylis, or rooms of 4 columns, Vitruvius calls the common name of the oiki. They were apartments for eating, and were generally of such a size as to hold 2 triclinia, or tables, with 3 beds each. Next to these we find different apartments destined for bathing, a practice which the ancients considered as essential to health, and with regard to all the apparatus necessary for that purpose, they displayed not only great elegance, but the utmost luxury. Here we first enter the apoditrium, which was a room for undressing, and sometimes contained a calida piscina, or lukewarm bath, so large as to allow of swimming about in it. Next to this is the cella frigidaria, in which there was a baptisterium, or cold bath. Adjoining to this is the unctuarium, or repository for unguents, with which the ancients anointed themselves before their exercises. From this we go to the cella tepidaria, or cella media, so named from its middle degree of heat, and because it was a necessary preparation for the laconicum, or cella caldaria, which was a bagnio for sweating in. All these different rooms in the bathing apartment were lighted from the roof. On the other side of the cella media was a sphiesterium, a room allotted for the different exercises of the ball. This too must have been lighted from the roof. On the other side was the emperor's cubiculum dormitorium, or bedchamber, which lay extremely convenient for the bathing apartment, and seems to have been particularly contrived for excluding light and noise. Pliny mentions an invention of the same kind in a bedchamber at his villa of Laurentium. Adjoining to it and towards the crypto porticus was what I take to have been a private gynatio, or supping room. This enjoyed the benefit of the setting sun, which for winter eating rooms Vitruvius recommends as requisite. Beyond the exterior procaitori, and adjoining the arcade, are a number of vaults, which were probably employed as cella servorum, or cells for slaves, though originally, and during the time that Diocletian held the empire, they might be used for lodging the Praetorian soldiers. It is observable that during all my researches among the ruins of this fabric, I could not perceive the smallest vestige of a fireplace, though this was a circumstance to which I attended with particular care. Fireplaces, however, the ancients undoubtedly had, as Vitruvius mentions them, and directs the cornices of those rooms in which they were used to be puri, or unenriched, that the dirtiness contracted by the smoke might be the more easily wiped away. The baths, the dormitorium, the sphaeristorium, and other apartments which I have just now described, lie all in the west end of the palace. There are not now any remains of the eastern part of the imperial apartments beyond the Egyptian and Corinthian halls. But as there is an exact uniformity in those rooms on each side of the atrium, so far as they remain, as on the other side, especially as a separate bathing apartment for the women seems necessary to complete the conveniency and elegance of this building. The Pinacotheca, or room for pictures, and the Bibliotheca, or library, are apartments which Vitruvius mentions as common in all great houses of the Romans. It would therefore surprise the reader should he find no such rooms in the palace of an emperor who was so remarkable for his love of the fine arts. But if we consider that noble porticus or gallery which stretches along 3 sides of this building above the Caelae Servorum and Arcades, or arcades, extending no less than 1212 feet in length and 31 feet in breadth, it is evident that sufficient space was left for apartments consecrated to those elegant arts of which Diocletian was so great an admirer. Towards the east, as we learn from Vitruvius, was the proper situation for the Bibliotheca. Towards the north was the exposure most approved for pictures, and the west side may have been reserved for as a horeum, a room which Pliny mentioned as a repository for statues, bas-relief, and other curious productions of art. This gallery was divided by the 3 gates to the palace, and by the flares on each side of them. But I found the communication had been preferred by passages formed in the thickness of the walls over the gates, as may be seen by the general sections. I come now to the temples, which are placed in 2 areas adjoining to the palace, and are seen on each side of the Persistelium. Through its rows of granite columns, such attention to the honor and worship of the gods is suitable to the character which is given of Diocletian by ancient authors. The square temple, which was situated on the west, was dedicated to Aesculapius. It was prostylos, tetrastylos, and its intercolumnations were something more than systylos. The columns are all on one principal front. There are 4 of them on that front, and intercolumnations are about 2 1/5 diameters. The ascent to it was by a stair of 15 steps, an uneven number being generally used in the temples, that beginning to move with the right foot, they might of course place it first upon the uppermost step, in order to enter the temple, a form which they accounted respectful in approaching a deity. On the other side of the Persistelium stands the octagonal temple dedicated to Jupiter, who was worshipped by Diocletian with particular veneration and honor, of whom he assumed the surname of Jovius. This temple is of that kind which Vitruvius calls peripteros, or surrounded with 1 row of columns, having an intercolumnation or space between them and the wall. It is lighted by an arched window over the door. The dome over it is of bricks constructed in a very singular and ingenious manner, which, together with its walls, are of such solidity as to have refitted almost unhurt the injuries of so many ages. This temple is situated nearer the Persistelium than the other, the reason of which seems to have been in order to gain space. There are 16 towers in all round this building, 1 on each angle, and 4 on each side, except that towards the Adriatic. These towers seem to have been intended for ornament rather than for defense, it being impossible that a structure of this kind could ever be designed for a place of strength. We learn from Pliny that towers were no uncommon ornament even in the villas of private persons. There were 2 of them in his villa at Laurentinum, and in them he places not only keeping apartments, Stomkus Marnovicius, an author whose words are produced by Philatus, assures us that in one of these towers towards the south was the burial place of Diocletian, and that about 2 centuries ago the body of the emperor had been discovered there. He is even so minute as to describe the porphyry sarcophagus in which his remains were contained. Encouraged by the favourable reception which has been given of late to works of this kind, particularly to the ruins of Palmyra and Baalbek, I now present the fruits of my labour to the public. I am far from contemplating my undertaking with that of Messrs. Dawkins, Bouverie, and Wood, one of the most splendid and liberal that is ever attempted by private persons. I was not, like these gentlemen, obliged to traverse deserts, or to expose myself to the insults of barbarians, nor can the remains of a single palace vie with those surprising and almost unknown monuments of sequestered grandeur which they have brought to light. But at a time when the admiration of the Grecian and Roman architecture has risen to such a height in Britain as to banish in great measure all fantastic and frivolous tastes, and to make it necessary for every architect to study and to imitate the ancient manner, I flatter myself that this work, executed at considerable expense, the effect of great labour and perseverance, and which contains the only full and accurate designs that have hitherto been published of any private edifice of the ancients, will be received with indulgence, and may, perhaps, be esteemed an acquisition of some importance. Robert Adam. Let's see what you've done with pencil and paper. Very, very nice. I think you've got everything there. We have the guard towers, the gates, the portico, walkways, and the temple of Jupiter. The guardhouses, the atrium, and all of the chambers, and the other temple there. Very beautifully done. I'm going to save that in our scrapbook. Thank you for spending this time with me here in the study. It's always such a pleasure. And it has been very relaxing. A very happy time. Take that relaxation and happiness. Keep it inside yourself. Be good to yourself. Be kind to others.